Next up, we will be discussing customer-centricity, unlocking profitable growth and success. Now, this session is brought to you by Salesforce. With that, I would like to invite Adlin Yusman, Managing Director of Underwall Malaysia, and joining him on stage are Man Kin Tran, Head of Sales, Small and Medium Business, Salesforce ASEAN, and James Watson, Director of Investments, Catcher Group. Gentlemen, the stage is yours.
Welcome, guys. I'll do a quick intro for those that don't know who's on the stage. So I'm Adlin, so I run Endeavour Malaysia. We're a global entrepreneur support organization in 41 markets. To my right is Mankin, who leads Salesforce in, I was trying to get it here, all markets in ASEAN except for Singapore and Thailand. I'm right? Yes, okay, so I'm right on that one.
Completely right.
Yes. And James is, of course, leading investments for Catcher Group.
Yep. Hello, everyone.
So thanks for having us on the panel. We'll start with the first question with you, Mankin. So customer centricity is at the heart of every startup, right? I mean, everybody wants to own their customers, and it gets increasingly harder to say, these days, to acquire a customer, it's always getting more expensive, right? So the first question I have is, as a technology leader, you've worked with many small and I think growing businesses in the region. What is customer centricity, and how can growing startups and SME prioritize customer centricity to fuel their growth?
Okay. So first of all, thank you, and good morning, Aline. Good morning, everyone in the room. I'm very glad to be here, and that's a very good question. So if I want to set a little bit the context of why we are here, etc., I think if there's one thing we need to learn, to remember of what happened during the past 3 years is right now we live in an all digital world. And companies, every organization has really need to prioritize on two things, I would say. The first thing is about innovation. The second is about transformation. One consequences of this new world is, just like what you mentioned, we find it much more harder to connect the companies, the employees, with the customers. And one of the reasons is very simple, because so many things are new, and that's the reason we live in a new world, right? There are new communication channels. There are new rules, new skills that we need to learn. So many things, right? New stakeholders, etc. Even for someone like me who's coming from France, wearing a mask was new. It took me a couple of weeks to adjust, to accommodate, to get used to a mask. So having said that, the world is completely different, and digitization is the only way for the business to stay afloat. That's what I wanted to say. And one challenge is coming, just like the difficulties between connecting the companies and the customers, is really this big customer success gap that we're going to talk a little bit about it. So, as I said, let's take a step back, and customers is the bloodline of every businesses. I think everyone in the room will agree with me, we all need customers. And customer centricity is basically the ability for a business or an organization to understand the customer situation and expectations. So it's very important right now to really put the customers at the center of every decisions you want to make in regards to a service, in terms of delivering a product, etc. So customers has to be put back at the centers. And put yourself in the customer's shoes, right? Because at the end of the day, we are all customers. We are all buying things, etc. Customers right now are expecting the business to engage with them the way they want, and they want the organization, the companies, to know them. I remember, so I started in this industry 20 years back, and a few years ago, when we were talking about marketing, there was the concept of one-to-many. I'm going to build my marketing plan, one-to-many. I'm going to build my content, send it to everyone. Boom, the work is done. We moved to the one-to-many to what we call the one-to-one, trying to have some segmentations in terms of categorizations. We're trying to get some segment based on the profile, etc. Nowadays, we move to the concept of one-to-you. We want the brand, we want the organizations to understand me as an individual. I don't want to get categorized. So it is very, very important. And in order to make it happen, you need the structure, you need the technologies to support your entire team, to engage with the customers they want and not the opposite. So before I wrap up on, on your questions, because I've been talking a lot, I just want to highlight maybe one customer who's using our platform, so Xenium. I'm not sure if they are in the room. I don't think so. If so, just raise your hand. So who is Xenium? Xenium is a smart cosmetic company founded in Singapore in 2018. So their mission, their goal was quite straightforward. They wanted to bring accessible cosmetic dentistry to over 600 million customers in Asia. So you can imagine this fast-growing expansion plan, typical hypergrowth. And they wanted to do it for 4 or 5 years max. So really scaling from Singapore to the rest of Asia, so countries like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, and of course, Malaysia. And they decided to have a partnership with Salesforce. And thanks to this partnership, they were able to really achieve around 8 times the lead activation and the sales conversion rate by providing the sales team, the service team with the right platform. So that's what I wanted to say.
I mean, that's amazing. You're talking about scaling of that 600 million customers, right?
Yes, it's a lot.
I'm gonna move this a bit to James, because I think, James, you particularly invest in startups at scale, or you, in fact, IPO'd some of your own companies within Catcher Group, right? And primarily, most of Catcher's businesses is to consumers, or direct to consumers. We were discussing it earlier, B2C, D2C, right? We're not going to confuse the audience here with the nomenclature, but how are you seeing, with today's market, how are you keeping your customers as part of your business? Is it a challenge these days?
Yeah, I mean, there are many challenges that we're seeing with our portfolio companies in terms of, firstly, acquiring customers. I think there's never been more parts, both offline and online, in order to acquire your customers, but then maintaining those customers. And all of our portfolio companies face competition both domestically and internationally in terms of maintaining their customer base. So I think key challenges that we see probably more on the B2C side. One is the ever-changing behavior set that we see from consumers. So being able to adapt your internal organizations and being nimble and being able to pivot, be it early stage companies that are still really trying to narrow in on their mission and what they're trying to do, being able to pivot that correctly and quickly and be nimble to do that, versus the more established companies that then face competition, face changing landscape like during the pandemic, which is for some industries being very good and for many industries being very shocking as well. So I think in terms of being customer centric and focused, there've never been there's never been more data to be able to pull upon. So we're also seeing companies that can quickly leverage that data and make very insightful decisions and understanding their consumer behavior and being able to pivot on the product side, as well as on the marketing and distribution side to be able to serve their customers best. So, I mean, there are a few different channels, right? We see with the likes of, very big companies like Apple, we're always an innovator in terms of saying, we know what the customer wants and we're going to build that. And then that was very successful. But actually for a lot of companies, that's much harder to do. So being able to innovate quickly and pivot your business and directly can serve your consumer, we think is a key differentiator for companies that we look at in the marketplace.
Pivot is a bad word, right? That's what a lot of startups do when they find their business isn't working. And I guess if you realize in the pandemic, it's the biggest pivot for all of us, right? We went from mostly everybody working in an office to then moving online completely, and then now it's a bit of hybrid going on. So Salesforce have always been online, right? That's how you manage. That's essentially what Salesforce does, right? Back in the day, before everybody was working remotely, we were using Salesforce to manage all our tools, automations, and so do you see a growth during the pandemic in terms of people being more agile in managing their business and moving more towards using a lot of what you do at Salesforce and using your tools to make their businesses more optimal, right?
Yeah, definitely. One thing I wanted to highlight before that is, as part of my job, I spend a lot of time talking, engaging, advising my customers, right, across Southeast Asia. And one very common thing I realize is, most of them are trying to solve a problem at one time. They are not really paying attention to the big pictures, to what we can call the end state. So they come to us saying, okay, I have specific requirements around the marketing. I want to improve my marketing generations. I want to better serve or engage with my customers, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not trying to think about these entire big pictures. Again, that's okay. I mean, that because other consequences, you are going to acquire one solution after the other one. And we have no problem about this best-of-breed approach. That's fine. But the challenges we are seeing is about, if you are having many solutions, where are you going to have your single source of truth based on your customers' data? And it goes back to what I just mentioned earlier about the customer centricity. And I'm not even talking about the integrations in terms of complexity, in terms of cost, etc. So the challenges here is more about, not having a single source of truth for every actions, every initiative from your companies. And you need to achieve it because of this new digital engagement that you need to provide to your customers, right? This concept of one to you. If you don't have it, it's not possible to make it effective. And again, back to your point, it's about the agility, right? If you don't have the data, the real-life data, how do you want to really react on the market condition? That's very, very important. So if you want to be customer-centric, you need to ask yourself about what will be the ideal customer's experience you want to provide. Again, let's try to put yourself at the customer's shoes, right? You being a customer, you need to really identify and how to prioritize on those gaps. What is the biggest impact that you want to make for you and for your business? Okay, so you need to always, I would say, select the technologies to solve a problem and can really support the rest of your customer journey. That's very important.
So I'm gonna take a bit of what you just said, right? And I think looking at the evolution of tools, I mean, it is in a time of a black swan event like the pandemic, you have to literally fly the plane as you're building it. And most startups do it all the time anyway, but even more so in the pandemic. During the pandemic, I think Kalis became part of, which is part of your, what is iCar Asia, right? Became part of Kasem, which is now Malaysia's unicorn, right?
Yep.
You did that in the pandemic, right? How did you do a deal of that sort in the pandemic when people were mostly online? And you got to talk about people integrating. What tools were you using to integrate, communications and culture? How did that?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So this kind of ties in both to how to be customer-centric, but then also organizing yourselves internally and with your existing stakeholders. So I think, clearly one of the key tools that successful businesses and companies used at that time to get things going forward is to communicate. Now, communication's always been important, but it has changed. It's changed over the last, obviously 3 years, becoming much more online, and now we're getting back into in-person events. Thank everyone for the organization here today. But I think even if you look at companies that are the largest companies in the world today, the likes of Facebook and Google, etc. They, versus the largest companies, 20, 25 years ago that were consumer-facing, they have much less direct interaction with their consumers. It's all digital. And so having that personalization element, being able to communicate effectively with your consumers has been, become even more important. I think particularly around this transaction, being able to do things remotely, you can adapt. Things that would not have been possible in 2019 suddenly became possible in 2020. Necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So, be it due diligence, site visits remotely, having someone in person that can be there and show things on camera and doing things that way, or just making sure that we communicate effectively and efficiently with people remotely. It's still, all these things can still be possible. Nothing fully supplements that in-person interaction and being able to do things tangibly and in person. But when needed, I think it's shown that 2020 and 2021, I think, were some of the most innovative and actually very productive years in the economy in many, many years. People were unfortunately stuck in their houses or couldn't travel, but were still able to get things done effectively. So it's great now that we can travel again and see people in person. But I think communication definitely, for me, was the key learning, making sure you utilize all those communication tools and these things can be done online.
And with that, I'll go back to you, Mankin, talking about exactly doing stuff online. How are you managing it in terms of operations, cutting costs, and Salesforce, as I mentioned earlier, right? You do this pretty well, even before the pandemic. So how were you helping your customers move more towards getting things done a little bit more easier remotely versus before it was mainly in the office, right? Now it's all online.
Yeah. I would say, to answer your questions, technologies is going to play the crucial role. So technologies has become critical to support every business. And of course, unfortunately, we have seen it during COVID-19, right? Because overnight, we were not able to meet our customers, our colleagues, our friends, or whatsoever. We have been asked to stay at home, right? So solutions like Zoom became a norm for the video conferencing. So, and just happened like that, right? Because no one, unfortunately, could have predicted this COVID-19. So it is very important to really adopt the cloud technologies, right? Because it can really help you, I would say, on maybe 3 things. Help your ecosystems to drive automations. Second is maybe to access your customers' data from anywhere, from home, from office, sometimes from vacation, sometimes no choice. Huh? And make the third one is about making the decisions that are backed up by data, facts, rational. Okay, so that's really important. And going back to this example, same as us, right? I'm coming from Singapore, so our Singapore office has been asked to close. People has been asked to work from home, correct? And overnight, just like what I mentioned earlier, hey, you cannot connect. So how do you want, or how can you basically continue to connect, to collaborate, to engage with everyone, your customers, your colleagues, your managers, etc., etc. And one thing that we realized is our focus has slightly changed as well. We need to care, we need to concern about our staff, our communities, our ecosystems. I'm not saying that it was not the case before, but well-being become more and more important during this challenging period, right? So again, it's more about the ability. So the right technologies can really help you to be much more agile. So it's also very important, right? Customer centricity can help you on different things, but you need to think about, you need to make sometimes I would say the informed decisions and to react to situations quickly. Because there are things like COVID-19 it's not something we can predict in the future, right? So again, we need to learn from the past and how to make ourselves much more agile. I think that's very important.
I'm gonna shift gears and move something a little bit more, I guess, incendiary, right? So as market is recovering, you see some sectors growing, blockbuster, revenues. They've never seen this, even pre-pandemic, right? And I move towards you, James, because you're in the investment scene. We saw 500 posted earlier. Most dry powder is seen in the past 10 years, but capital is being deployed much more carefully these days. Right? You can't be growing for the sake of growth, right? You can't be acquiring customers at whatever CAC that it is or what it was before, right? And I'm curious to see this, right? Every customer you acquire is no longer loyal to your brand, which we said in a couple of questions earlier. How are you as an investor looking at deals today? And are you very much concerned in profitability? Is that your main, mantra moving forward? Or are you still saying, look, growth is still important?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this definitely moves in cycles. So I remember, back, about 6-7 years ago, I was working in the strategic finance team and corporate finance team at Grab, looking to raise capital at that time. And that was it was the same time that Gojek then were looking to raise their first very big round after they raised around 200 million from North Star and et cetera. At that point in time, everyone was quite focused, obviously, on growth, but even more so on unit economics and making sure that you had a path to profitability and proving that out. So I think for companies out there, this piece definitely moves in cycles. I think showing, ultimately, when there's a lot of capital in the market and markets are strong, naturally, those companies that show scale and growth will probably be prioritized over those that are showing some sort of level of profitability. In markets that are more bearish, that cycle will move towards companies that are showing a clearer path to profitability and don't need as much capital to grow. But I would simplify things. I think you obviously need to continue to show growth both in obtaining new customers and making sure that they're retained successfully and you don't have to spend too much to retain them. So unit economics are always going to be important with your customer base, and investors are always going to look at that. So lifetime value over CAC, et cetera, is going to always be very important. But depending on the stage of your company, you always need to be able to show that growth. So if you're a business that's headquartered in Malaysia, you've got regional ambitions, having that ability to raise capital or do M&A or other organic or other inorganic strategies and JVs, et cetera, to be able to grow your platform is always going to be critical. So I'd say this thing generally moves in cycles, I find. I think right now, clearly the cycle is in the private markets in the earlier stage, probably not as bearish as in the later stages right now. Both are always important and investors are always demanding. But I would say as a group on our side, we always look for companies that have strong, that have relatively low cost to acquire users and have a platform that can retain them successfully with minimal churn and can sustain that, sustain that growth. So I'd say right now it's probably more moving towards the profitability side. Depends on the stage of business that you have, but this thing moves in cycles, absolutely. So this time next year, the answer could be very different in terms of where the market's at.
And with scaling, there are some growth issues that comes with that, right? And as you're growing, you're required to have different tools, again, to manage your customers. Even emails cost money to send. When it's 1,000 customers versus 80,000 customers you're sending out, that 80,000 customers adds a lot of damage to whatever you're spending every month because it's a huge cost. So similarly, managing staff from 30, 40 people to 150 then requires different tools to manage your team, right? They may be in the same country, they may be across the region, right? So which is when I'm going to sort of push it back to you, Monkey. I think in this case, you've seen businesses who scale, because you're in this particular space. You're in the small, medium business that you've seen Tokopedia when they were small and they grew. Similarly for Gojek, they became GoTo. How do you see these companies grow with you in terms of managing their business?
Yeah. So the first thing, I hope that now everyone in the room, the audience is convinced that, digitization is no longer a wish or a nice to have, right? It's a whole new way of doing business. So we've been talking a lot about, customers acquisitions, et cetera, but I think let's take a step back and what is really the definition of scaling? I would say at Salesforce, we believe that scaling is really when the revenue increases without a substantial increase in terms of resources. I think that's how we want to define it. So basically, it's really to create better efficiency. Whatever additional resources you're adding, it has to be reflected on the return on investment. So this digital-first mindset has to be infused into your company culture. And again, we've been talking about agility, so it has to remain agile and to deliver what we can call this empathetic customer's experience. As I said, we've been talking a lot about cost, investment, etc., but it's not just about money. Company culture is very important, and I'm sure that will be the case for a lot of startup SMEs in the room as well. You want to go to the next step. You need to hire the right people ahead of the curve, right? So usually what you do in terms of hiring, you're hiring some generalists, a little bit scrappy sometimes, and they tend to become specialists coming with some playbooks, with a more industrialized mindset, etc. But then it goes back to just like what you mentioned. You do have the proper foundation, the proper tech foundations to support them. That's going to be very complicated. So it's very important as well to identify what will be the prime areas for automations. And one challenges I have seen when I spoke to my customers is you don't want your companies, your fast-growing startups, unicorns, or whatsoever, to be over-dependent on one person or using some independent or isolated knowledge. And for instance, I can give you an example about the payroll. Payroll, I've seen, payroll is not something very important because at the end of the day, we're going to pay everyone. And we tend to really isolate it a little bit and manage by one person. How about if he or she is on PTO, he's on vacation? What are you going to do? So that's the type of simple things that we need to keep in mind. Again, it's about customers facing, cost acquisition, etc. But you need to think about your internal foundations, and adopting the right technique is also very important.
We'll go into the last question, because I can see the clock is sort of ticking right in front of me. It's huge, right? The last question is this, and I'll go back to you, James, because I have a personal interest in how you manage your portfolios, because your portfolios are, I guess it's across countries, it's across verticals, it's industries, right? Are there any best practices that you share, whether it's amongst your portfolios or something that maybe at group level you sort of cascade down? Is there something that you can share with founders here today to say, how did Catch Up become so successful, incubating so many successful brands under you?
Yeah, so look, I think a few things. One, I mean, to Munkin's point before, I think as you scale, the game gets very different. So, be it from 5 employees to 20 employees to then 50, 100, then going orders of magnitude above there, you need to be, in those early days, quick to adapt and professionalize your organization to make sure that both internal communications and alignment is there. So that's getting back to that, crystallizing that mission statement we think is very, very important, very critical at an early stage, in order to make sure that you are addressing your customer base for what they need. You are adapting to market environment and adapting to your own, I guess, changes within the organization as you scale and grow. It's painful, or building out the finance or building out HR, building out product and ops and everything. You maintaining that culture around being focused on customers is not easy. So having a very clear mission statement we think is very critical. Make sure that you're hiring the right people that fit into what you're looking to do, and are customer-centric and customer-focused is very critical. And we do operate across many countries. So obviously this region, I think we were discussing before, a bit similar to Europe, is probably the other market we see in the world where you've got quite a connected region that has very different languages, different cultures, but is still quite connected. And so being able to localize and understand the nuances of different markets is critical. So if you're looking to expand regionally, do you do it organically? Do you partner with a local partner? Do you JV? Do you actually acquire best in practice to do that? Those are the things that we look for in terms of strategic focus in our portfolio companies to make sure that they're doing the right thing to expand, because it's a very exciting and such a prospective region to be operating in Southeast Asia, but it comes with many challenges and many it's a very heterogeneous market. So being able to adapt to that, we think is a critical aspect we look for in the companies that we invest in.
And what about you, Mankin? You look at a number of startups as well. Any best practices you've seen within your stable of clients that you've managed?
Yeah, so in order to answer that question, I'm going to be very practical. I'm going to highlight one very great success stories that we have, and this one is coming from Vietnam. So I want to spend a couple of minutes to talk about Catalan. So who is Catalan? I'm sure you guys have heard about it, and unfortunately, Daisy could not make it today. So Catalan is a very successful startup that, experience this hyper growth, and they have a very aggressive, I would say, growth plan. And they were looking for partners to really help them to support, to scale the business, etc. And finally, they selected Salesforce as a catalyst for these initiatives, I would say. So Catalan is a leading software testing automation solutions with a very, very flexible platform. They can be run on the web, on the mobile, providing different APIs, etc. And thanks to this partnership with Salesforce, I would say Catalan was able to really hire in any countries. So it goes back to what you mentioned, because you started your startup in Vietnam, but if you have a plan to grow globally, you cannot just keep hiring in the same countries. So that's why hiring was very important. And they were able to really serve all the customers across 160 countries in just a couple of years. So you can think about, how aggressive the plan was. And we also help them, we Salesforce help them to really align the best as we can about the sales coverage with the pipeline generations, during each sales cycles, just to ensure that thanks to our automation solutions, we can really give them like real-time data to make the right decisions. So in terms of results, they managed to get around 4 times in terms of increase, in terms of revenue growth. And so Daisy, who is the MD at Catalan, when I asked her about, hey, how can you be such a successful, etc., she keeps telling me about, this concept of 3 Ps. 3 Ps, the first P is around people. So they believe that, revenues follow the people. They need to scale for the talent. And you need to hire ahead of the curve. So if Catalan wants to become the next unicorn, we need to hire people right now. Second P is around the product. They started with a single product, and they are now having a portfolio of an end-to-end approach. They managed to build this entire ecosystem. But same, how do you enable your team? What will be the messaging? What will be the positionings? And the third P is really around the product and the processes. Sorry, product was the second P. From the processes perspective, they moved from a people-driven to a process-driven. The ways of working, they wanted to ensure that all the systems they are bringing in is going to help the companies to move ahead. So the 3 Ps is something that, was very helpful to make Catalan who they are right now in the market. And few of us few of the names I just want to highlight here, because again, we've been talking about Zenium, we've been talking about Catalan, etc., but we have much more customers across Southeast Asia. And this one is more referring back to what I was saying at the beginning. Think about the end state. Again, because the main topic today is around customer-centricity. We've been talking a lot about cost, customers acquisitions, but think about the big pictures. What are the other KPIs you, being a founder, being a CEO needs to achieve? Don't forget the end goal. And maybe just on that one, I wanted to highlight one very successful brand. So I'm not sure if Hula is in the room as well. So who is Hula? Hula is a very successful fintech started or founded in Singapore in also 2018. Their motto is very simple: buy now, pay later. So I think that's something that everybody will like. And very successful thanks to the partnership. And the reason I wanted to tell them, because the use case was very simple, adopting Salesforce as part of the customer-centric strategies to have one single source of truth. So Hula has been acquired by Shopback in 2011 as part of the Shopback's expansion plan.
And with that, I will say, Mankin, thank you for your time. James, appreciate all the
Thank you.
words of wisdom. So in terms of where funding is going to go this year, thank you both again for your time. Thank you for the audience for being here for today. And with that, we're done with the panel. Thank you so much.
If I may just take 10 minutes, thank you very much, Adeline. Thank you for a lot, James. If we can just go back to, if you can just take 10 minutes to scan the QR code. And again, because we are trying to really share as much knowledge from as we can, so feel free to feedback with us, and I'm going to be around. So if you have any more questions, feel free to come to me, and happy to connect. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for taking a little bit longer.
Words of wisdom, indeed. Thank you, gentlemen. That was such a good session on how important customers are for businesses. And I hope you guys took every point into account, because it definitely will be the next game changer to stay competitive. Thank you, panelists.